György Schwartz was born on 12th August 1930 in Budapest, in the Kingdom of Hungary, to a prosperous, non-observant Jewish family who, like many upper-middle-class Hungarian Jews at the time, were uncomfortable with their roots. Soros has wryly described his home as a Jewish anti-Semitic home. The family of his mother, Erzsébet, also known as Elizabeth, operated a successful silk store. His father, Tivadar, also known as Teodoros Schwartz, was a lawyer and a well-known Esperanto author who edited the Esperanto literary magazine Literatura Mondo and raised his son to speak the language. Tivadar had also been a prisoner of war during and after World War I until he escaped from Russia and rejoined his family in Budapest. The two married in 1924. In 1936, Soros's family changed their name from the German Jewish Schwartz to Soros as protective camouflage in increasingly anti-Semitic Hungary. Tivadar liked the new name because it is a palindrome and because of its meaning. In Hungarian, Soros means next in line or designated successor. In Esperanto, it means will soar. Soros was 13 years old in March 1944 when Nazi Germany occupied Hungary. The Nazis barred Jewish children from attending school, and Soros and the other school children were made to report to the Judenrat, Jewish Council, which had been established during the occupation. Soros later described this time to writer Michael Lewis. The Jewish Council asked the little kids to hand out the deportation notices. I was told to go to the Jewish Council, and there I was given these small slips of paper. I took this piece of paper to my father. He instantly recognized it. This was a list of Hungarian Jewish lawyers. He said, "You deliver the slips of paper and tell the people that if they report, they will be deported." I'm not sure to what extent he knew they were going to be gassed. I did what my father said. Soros did not return to that job. His family survived the war by purchasing documents to say that they were Christians. Later that year, at age 14, Soros posed as the Christian godson of an official of the collaborationist Hungarian government's Ministry of Agriculture, who himself had a Jewish wife in hiding. On one occasion, rather than leave the 14-year-old alone, the official took Soros with him while completing an inventory of a Jewish family's confiscated estate. Tivadar saved not only his immediate family, but also many other Hungarian Jews, and Soros later wrote that 1944 had been the happiest year of his life, for it had given him the opportunity to witness his father's heroism. In 1945, Soros survived the siege of Budapest, in which Soviet and German forces fought house to house through the city. György and his mother also spent some time hiding with the family of Elsa Brandeis, and even attended their Lutheran church with them. When he was 17, Soros relocated to Paris before eventually moving to England. There, he became a student at the London School of Economics. While a student of the philosopher Karl Popper, Soros worked as a railway porter and as a waiter, and once received £40 from a Quaker charity. Soros would sometimes stand at Speaker's Corner, lecturing about the virtues of internationalism in Esperanto, which he had learned from his father. Soros obtained his Bachelor of Science in Philosophy in 1951 and a Master of Science in Philosophy in 1954 from the London School of Economics. After graduating, he wanted to stay in the university and work as a professor, but his grades were not high enough, prompting him to work for an investment firm in London. In a discussion at the Los Angeles World Affairs Council in 2006, Alvin Schuster, former foreign editor of the Los Angeles Times, asked Soros, "How does one go from an immigrant to a financier? When did you realize that you knew how to make money?" Soros replied, "Well, I had a variety of jobs, and I ended up selling fancy goods on the seaside souvenir shops, and I thought, that's really not what I was cut out to do. So I wrote to every managing director in every merchant bank in London, got just 1 or 2 replies, and eventually that's how I got a job in a merchant bank." In 1954, Soros began his financial career at the Merchant Bank, Singer and Friedlander of London. He worked as a clerk and later moved to the arbitrage department. A fellow employee, Robert Mayer, suggested he apply at his father's brokerage house, F.M. Mayer of New York. In 1956, Soros moved to New York City, where he worked as an arbitrage trader for F.M. Mayer, 1956-59. He specialized in European stocks, which were becoming popular with U.S. institutional investors following the formation of the coal and steel community, which later became the common market. In 1959, after 3 years at F.M. Mayer, Soros moved to Wertheim am Schuie. He planned to stay for 5 years, enough time to save $500,000, after which he intended to return to England to study philosophy. He worked as an analyst of European securities until 1963. During this period, Soros developed the theory of reflexivity to extend the ideas of his tutor at the London School of Economics, Karl Popper. Reflexivity posits that market values are often driven by the fallible ideas of participants, not only by the economic fundamentals of the situation. Ideas and events influence each other in reflexive feedback loops. Soros argued that this process leads to markets having procyclical, virtuous, or vicious cycles of boom and bust, in contrast to the equilibrium predictions of more standard neoclassical economics. From 1963 to 1973, Soros's experience as a vice president at Arnhold and S. Bleichroder resulted in little enthusiasm for the job. Business was slack following the introduction of the interest equalization tax, which undermined the viability of Soros's European trading. He spent the years from 1963 to 1966 with his main focus on the revision of his philosophy dissertation. In 1966, he started a fund with $100,000 of the firm's money to experiment with his trading strategies. In 1969, Soros set up the Double Eagle Hedge Fund with $4 million of investors' capital, including $250,000 of his own money. It was based in Curaçao, Dutch Antilles. Double Eagle itself was an offshoot of Arnhold and S. Bleichroder's first Eagle Fund, established by Soros and that firm's chairman Henry H. Arnhold in 1967. In 1973, the Double Eagle Fund had $12 million and formed the basis of the Soros Fund. George Soros and Jim Rogers received returns on their share of capital and 20% of the profits each year. In 1970, Soros founded Soros Fund Management and became its chairman. Among those who held senior positions there at various times were Jim Rogers, Stanley Druckenmiller, Mark Schwartz, Keith Anderson, and Soros's 2 sons. In 1973, due to perceived conflicts of interest limiting his ability to run the 2 funds, Soros resigned from the management of the Double Eagle Fund. He then established the Soros Fund and gave investors in the Double Eagle Fund the option of transferring to that or staying with Arnhold and S. Bleichroder. It was later renamed the Quantum Fund, after the physical theory of quantum mechanics. By that time, the value of the fund had grown to $12 million, only a small proportion of which was Soros's own money. He and Jim Rogers reinvested their returns from the fund and also a large part of their 20% performance fees, thereby expanding their stake. By 1981, the fund had grown to $400 million, and then a 22% loss in that year and substantial redemptions by some of the investors reduced it to $200 million. In July 2011, Soros announced that he had returned funds from outside investors' money, valued at $1 billion, and instead invested funds from his $24.5 billion family fortune due to changes in U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission disclosure rules, which he felt would compromise his duties of confidentiality to his investors. The fund had at that time averaged over 20% per year compound returns. In 2013, the Quantum Fund made $5.5 billion, making it again the most successful hedge fund in history. Since its inception in 1973, the fund has generated $40 billion. The The fund announced in 2015 that it would inject $300 million to help finance the expansion of Fen Hotels, an Argentine hotel company. The funds will develop 5,000 rooms over the next 3 years throughout various Latin American countries. The question you're asking yourself is, how did he get all this money? Soros had been building a huge short position in pound sterling for months leading up to the Black Wednesday of September 1992. Soros had recognized the unfavorable position of the United Kingdom in the European exchange rate mechanism. For Soros, the rate at which the United Kingdom was brought into the European exchange rate mechanism was too high. Their inflation was also much too high, triple the German rate, and British interest rates were hurting their asset prices. Then by September 16, 1992, the day of Black Wednesday, Soros's fund had sold short more than $10 billion in pounds, profiting from the UK government's reluctance to either raise its interest rates to levels comparable to those of other European exchange rate mechanism countries or float its currency. Finally, the UK withdrew from the European exchange rate mechanism, devaluing the pound. Soros's profit on the bet was estimated at over $1 billion. He was dubbed the man who broke the Bank of England. The estimated cost of Black Wednesday to the UK Treasury was £3.4 billion. Stanley Druckenmiller, who traded under Soros, originally saw the weakness in the pound and stated Soros's contribution was pushing him to take a gigantic position. On October 26, 1992, the New York Times quoted Soros as saying, "Our total position by Black Wednesday had to be worth almost $10 billion. We plan to sell more than that." In fact, when Norman Lamont said just before the devaluation that he would borrow nearly $15 billion to defend sterling, we were amused because that was about how much we wanted to sell. Soros was believed to have traded billions of Finnish markas on February 5, 1996, in anticipation of selling them short. The marka had been put floating as a result of the early 1990s depression. The Bank of Finland and the Finnish government commented at the time they believed that a conspiracy was impossible. In 1997, during the Asian financial crisis, the Prime Minister of Malaysia, Mahathir Mohamad, accused Soros of using the wealth under his control to punish the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, for welcoming Myanmar as a member. With a history of anti-Semitic remarks, Mahathir made specific reference to Soros's Jewish background. It is a Jew who triggered the currency plunge, and implied Soros was orchestrating the crash as part of a larger Jewish conspiracy. 9 years later, in 2006, Mahathir met with Soros and afterwards stated that he accepted that Soros had not been responsible for the crisis. In an interview concerning the late 2000s recession, Soros referred to it as the most serious crisis since the 1930s. According to Soros, market fundamentalism, with its assumption that markets will correct themselves with no need for government intervention in financial affairs, has been some kind of an ideological excess. In Soros's view, the market's moods, a mood of the markets being a prevailing bias or optimism-pessimism with which the markets look at reality, actually can reinforce themselves so that there are these initially self-reinforcing, but eventually unsustainable and self-defeating boom-bust sequences or bubbles. In reaction to the late 2000s recession, he founded the Institute for New Economic Thinking in October 2009. This is a think tank composed of international economic, business, and financial experts who are mandated to investigate radical new approaches to organizing the international economic and financial system. In 1988, Soros was contacted by a French financier named György, who asked him to participate in an effort to assemble a group of investors to purchase a large number of shares in Société Générale, a leading French bank that was part of a privatization program, something instituted by the new government under Jacques Chirac. Soros eventually decided against participating in the group effort, opting to personally move forward with his strategy of accumulating shares in 4 French companies, Société Générale, as well as Suez, Paribas, and the Compagnie Générale d'Électricité. Earlier in 1989, the Commission des Opérations de Bourse, KOB, the French Stock Exchange Regulatory Authority, conducted an investigation of whether Soros's transaction in Société Générale should be considered insider trading. Soros had received no information from the Société Générale and had no insider knowledge of the business, but he did possess knowledge that a group of investors was planning a takeover attempt. Initial investigations found Soros innocent, and no charges were brought forward. However, the case was reopened a few years later, and the French Supreme Court confirmed the conviction on June 14, 2006, although it reduced the penalty to 940,000 euros. Soros denied any wrongdoing, saying news of the takeover was public knowledge, and it was documented that his intent to acquire shares of the company predated his own awareness of the takeover. In December 2006, he appealed to the European Court of Human Rights on various grounds, including that the 14-year delay in bringing the case to trial precluded a fair hearing. On the basis of Article 7 of the European Convention on Human Rights, stating that no person may be punished for an act that was not a criminal offense, at the time that it was committed, the court agreed to hear the appeal. In October 2011, the court rejected his appeal in a 4-3 decision, saying that Soros had been aware of the risk of breaking insider trading laws.